my name is Douglas Santos, and I work as a security strategist for FortiGuard Labs, which is a division of FortiGuards that specializes in threat research and response. And as a security strategist, I have a couple of responsibilities. One of them, as said before, is to keep an eye on the threat landscape, understand how the threats are shifting, and working with the developers not only to understand how can we mitigate that given threat, but also how can we make our engines better. Sometimes it's just a matter of a signature update. So let's say we come across a new malware sample and we understand that just with a given signature, with the given features and capabilities of the AV engine, we're able to mitigate the threat. But sometimes that requires something else. So for instance, who here remembers the WinRAR AC vulnerability, right? There was a vulnerability in the WinRAR product that once you supply it with AC, which is a common encryption compression algorithm, when you feed a vulnerable version of WinRAR a corrupted structure, ACE with a corrupted structure, that would basically trigger a vulnerability into WinRAR, allowing for remote code execution. So on that particular case, our AV engine wasn't able to deal with that. So we had to rewrite our AC parsing engine, because if we feed before the engine has been revamped and restructured, if we feed a specific AC file corrupted that had that vulnerability, the engine will simply not parse it correctly, and it wouldn't see that there's actually a vulnerability or an exploit on that. Other responsibilities include revamping our cyber threat intelligence feeds. Fortinet does provide a cyber threat intelligence feed in the form of automated feeds that can be incorporated into CM tools or threat intelligence platforms. But right now, we're only pushing what they call automated feeds, which is basically IP addresses, URLs, hashes. There's not too much context. So right now, I'm one of the guys that's leading the data science project to make sure that we're able to understand campaigns, threat actors, and extract TTPs out of those malware samples to make sure that the threat intelligence feed has more context and more information, so that our customers and our partners are able to have more visibility and context around those threats other than just IP addresses, URLs, and hashes. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about ransomware evolution. Ransomware has been around for more time that we give credit for, and it just seemed timely to talk to you guys about this, because at the very peak of ransomware evolution, it is targeting government institutions and municipalities like never before, right? So, okay. So I'll show you this trend has started earlier, and it didn't actually started as encrypting any files. It basically just scrambled some of the file system structures in a way that wouldn't make we wouldn't be able to access all your files. So naive and unexperienced computer users would be helpless against this first strain of viruses. Then we will explain how, in a few slides, how the techniques have changed from spray and pray to very focused and targeted attacks. That trend had started somewhere 2 or 3 years ago, when a cloud computing company has been held ransom for $1 million. I think it was in China. So a ransomware got a breach into their networks, and it got into all of their Linux servers. So most of their customers' infrastructure and services were held from ransom, and they were requesting $1 million in Bitcoin. Then we're going to be talking a little bit about what are the distribution vectors that are being leveraged by ransomware. 30 years ago, it started out very different than it is today. Now we have 4 or 5 main delivery methods. Some of them are way scarier than others. Some of them doesn't even require any interaction from the user for the payload to be triggered, which is very scary. And then I'm going to shift to some of the recent ransomware attacks, namely the Robin Hood malware, which is targeting government municipalities in the US and in Canada. And I think it's very timely for us to discuss this trend and how it has affected lots of cities in the US and what they are doing to fight this. And then, obviously, some key recommendations that we usually give to our customers in order to avoid. Some of them are very obvious. They've been talking about this for a long time. Some of the other key recommendations may not be as known as the other ones. And what to do if you don't follow the recommendations, right? How can you recover from ransomware? What to do when everything else has failed? What should we focus our efforts on? So before I start diving into the actual evolution of ransomware, I'd like to talk a little bit about how has malware and malware detection technologies has evolved. Well, in the very beginning, there was only signature-based solutions, right? So you have one malware, you calculate the hash of that malware, and you put that hash into a database. You push that database to your customers, and you have protection against those this specific file. But that doesn't scale very much, not at all actually. And if you take that specific sample of virus and change just one bit of information, one bit that might not even actually change any functionality of the malware, boom, you have another hash. So obviously this is not optimal, and this doesn't scale at all. So the second generation comes in, and then we're talking about sandboxes, right? So you're actually getting this specific malware, you are running it into a controlled environment, you are looking at open files, make connection, drop files, opening other processes address space, trying to hide its code into the other process address space. And that was good for some time. And it's some recent research says that almost 50% of all Canadian companies have some form of sandbox technology, if not on premises, on the cloud. So that can help you lessen the time to detect a little bit. Not by much, but it does help. And then we have the third generation, which is based on machine learning solutions. So we're quickly trying to understand everything that makes malware actually looks like malware. So basically, we're employing static and dynamic analysis so we can extract what we call features from those malwares. And on top of those features, we try to understand on how many pieces of malware that specific thing appear. And if obviously, if one specific feature that we've just found in one malware that we've just analyzed happens to be found on 80% of the malware, then we know via mathematics that it is 80% or so good in actually detecting malware. But even so, the efficacy and how good that specific solution is depend on where you are employing this specific feature or visibility. So if you're looking at static and dynamic behaviors, awesome, that is really good. But what if the instrumentation that you're using to get those static and dynamic behaviors are being made at the operational system level? If the malware is doing syscalls, it's interacting with the operating system, that might be good. We may call it. But what if it's a malware that is being written in a new language? Right? So different syscalls, different memory layouts, different opcodes. And what if a malware is completely written in assembly language? That's gonna just cross right over it, right? So going back to ransomware evolution, the first instance of ransomware that we had notice of was a virus that was unleashed in 1989. That predates the internet as we know it, right? Back then, that was the sexiest haircut that a male can have. Not this guy, obviously. Most of us girls were looking for Mel Gibson, right? Well, that in 1989, an American evolutionary biologist by the name of Joseph L. Popp thought it was a good idea. He was actually at that time working with AIDS research. So what he did was he wrote a little program that was disguised as a questionnaire for assessing the risk of somebody having AIDS, but it actually was a Trojan, right? So he was attending a World Health Organization at that time, and he mailed it via regular mail to 20,000 people, Okay, so those people, when they started the diskette, the questionnaire was presented to them. They were responding the questionnaire, and then after 90 reboots, this screen would be presented to them. And on that screen, it says that the person needs to send $189 to a PO box in Panama. So that was the first delivery method and the way that they got paid. And then in the year 2000s, when everybody was worried about the the year 2000 bug, we had a couple of what they call fake AV and performance enhancement tools. Those were mostly likely distributed to torrent sites or websites or drive-by downloads, where you would install something that would theoretically enhance the performance of your computer. And when you ran it, it was like, oh, I found a bunch of issues in your computer, and or if they didn't actually find it, there was nothing. They would actually make something, break something in order for you to make sure that you pay them, right? So obviously, there was initially a small fee around $30 to $100, and obviously they didn't fix anything, right? So in 2006, it was the birth of ransomware as we know it. So the first ransomware to actually use public key cryptography to carry out its encryption. So there was no actual way to, via the decryption process, to recover the plain text. But even though it was employing very, very potent cryptography, most of these malwares were riddled with bugs. The GP code and Activius had hundreds of issues on their code. So if I remember correctly, Activius actually didn't overwrite the file, it deleted. So you would be able to undelete it. And there was some other issues with GP code where even if you were able to get the private decryption key to decrypt the files, there were errors in the decryption routine where they weren't able to actually decrypt the file. So they were pretty buggy, and it was most mainly by individuals who were like just realizing the power of this tool and what could it be used for. And then 2013, CryptoLocker came along, and it was an attack that was mainly delivered via email and exploded from 5 of September to late May 2014. It typically propagated as an attachment to a seemingly innocuous email message, which actually looks like it was sent from a legitimate company. Most likely, the individual behind this threat had a network of spam bots who were actually sending those from actual companies, so it would feel more enticing and more real, so that you would be more prone to open that. So it contained a zip file and sometimes a an executable file, but with the extension as a PDF. So it was gonna be like invoice.pdf.exe.pdf. So it looked like a PDF, but it wasn't a PDF, obviously. So this was distributed via a well-known botnet called Game Over Zeus. And it was the first ransomware to actually demand the ransom to be paid in Bitcoin, which made it explode at that time. Some reports say that they netted close to $27 million. It was the first very lucrative ransomware operation to date. And in 2014, FBI via Operation Tovar was able to crack down a couple of their network and servers, and were able to get the encryption keys. So some of the victims from that malware were actually able to recover their data without having to pay anything. And one very interesting thing, it started using as well domain-generated algorithms. So unless you had a solution in your environment that has the ability to, via some kind of machine learning or even statistical analysis, to identify that if a given domain is generated via a domain generator algorithm, you wouldn't be able to stop that threat, right? So that's one of the things that it had evolved into. And then things really started to being picked up by cyber criminals. In 2015, CryptoWall came along, right? And we had close to 5 versions, iterations of that malware. And it was so huge, mainly because of the way that it was being delivered, right? So the threat actors behind CryptoWall actually breached into the hundreds to thousands of legitimate companies' domains, like Disney, if I'm not mistaken, Facebook ad networks, all of those big companies that a lot of people actually navigate to without giving a second thought. So what was actually happening, they were leveraging a vulnerability in Java. So the victim, using a vulnerable web browser, would browse to, let's say, Disney.com. And then on Disney.com was kind of hacked, no, it was hacked. And they implanted something called an exploit kit. An exploit kit actually works profiling the browser that is requesting the page from. So let's say I'm looking for a specific Windows version with a specific browser version and a specific plugin. If that happens, then it will redirect the user to another page where it would be exploited, and the payload would get installed into their computers. Of course, it was not only via what we call water holing attacks, but also via phishing emails and drive-by downloads as well. So they have a very intrinsic and complex network to deliver those malwares into redirect victims into specific domains where the other exploit kits were actually hosted. So CryptoWall actually had a lot of, it amped the game in a sense that it started to hide deep into the system. It was the first ransomware to actually employ code injection techniques. So once he got a foothold into the system, it would open up explorer.exe and try to hide its code inside the process. So it was the first iteration of a malware that actually had no processes running. So it's basically one trait of a fileless attack. So it executed the code. As soon as it was able to execute, it would open up another processes, explorer.exe or svchost.exe, and it would try to inject the code into a different process. So if you're looking at processes, you wouldn't find anything. It would be just the regular explorer.exe running. So that's nothing, right? Well, in 2016, there was the explosion of ransomware as a service. And that gave a ransomware a very good advantage. And it was really something that, if I believe correctly, it jumped from I think it was 300%. I'm not sure about the numbers, but it was a gigantic jump in ransomware samples. But that's just because the ransomware creators understand that they would be able to cast a wilder net and stay away from most of the investigation that is made. So when somebody when a threat hunter is actually looking at how was that malware delivered, it's actually looking at the infrastructure. So where is this malware communicating to? Where is it being downloaded from? So that part of the infrastructure is far away from the ransomware creators, right? So they just supply. On the dark web or the deep web, they have these pages where they basically sell what it's called malware builders. So you can specify parameters like, oh, I want this malware to have a ransom of 1 Bitcoin. I wanted to communicate with this endpoint. I wanted to use this kind of cryptography. So you just point and click, build your own malware, and then with that malware in your hands, you're able to then deliver it to a whole bunch of people. So it basically lowered the bar so that anyone could enter into this market to make a quick buck, right? There's no need to know programming at all. There's no need to understand cryptography. You don't need to do research on antivirus engines to see if your virus is actually gonna be effective or not. You just supply your affiliates with this malware builder, let them do the dirty work, and at the end of the day, you split your profits, right? So in 2017, that's when the S hit the F. So we had WannaCry and Petya, right? I think it was on a Friday in 2017 that the WannaCry started hitting computers worldwide. It was using an exploit that was previously disclosed by the NSA and had been patched by Microsoft 2 months before. And it's basically leveraging an SMB vulnerability to get its way into the networks. And from there, it had a self-replicating payload. So it is said, most people think that the initial infection vector was an SMB server that was open to the internet. So, but that's not being actually confirmed. So ransomworms were just basically a response to people getting wise. Well, not so wise, right? We still have a lot of breaches that happen because people are naive and go and clicking through everything. But it was a response to people getting wise about the spread of traditional ransomware that uses spam, social engineering, and phishing. So with ransomworms, you don't actually need to click or do anything. If you have a vulnerable application, if you're running a vulnerable web browser, like I've seen this, it was like, and this is one of the most scary things that we can see, zero-day vulnerability on a popular browser being exploited on the wild. Google security searchers, I think 1 month ago or 45 days ago, they come across 7 different iOS exploits. They were targeting Korean users. So just by visiting a website, that's it. You're a victim already, because if you're running a specific vulnerable version of that software, all it needs is just communication and the ability to serve you pages. So since you are browsing to that page, that's all it takes, right? So it has the ability to spread itself by using vulnerabilities, and not only vulnerabilities such as Eternal Blue, but also via credential stealing. So we had some instances where networks were completely infected in less than 3 minutes. Obviously, those were networks that didn't have any segmentation or zero trust architecture or anything. But they were actually doing credential stealing as well. There's a tool called Mimikatz, written by Benjamin Delphi, that actually allows you to steal credentials that are in memory from Windows. And if you don't actually profile your environment and you actually don't have very deep visibility into your network traffic and the interaction between processes in the kernel, very advanced attacks will get through and will be able to breach your networks and wreak havoc. So even if you have zero trust, and okay, I'm actually inspecting SSL traffic, I'm actually looking for IPS vulnerabilities, I have anti-malware between segments, but if somebody is doing credential stealing, that's something you will not see if you're not deeply instrumenting the operating system. In 2018, GandCrab came along, and over the course of 6 months, they released 5 GandCrab versions to date. Was the first ransomware that demanded ransom to be paid in the Dash cryptocurrency, and it actually utilizes DNS resolution via the bit top-level domain. that actually meant that no DNS server security solution would be able to stop it because the DNS requests were being made via the blockchain. So it completely evaded that part of the defense. And it was the first malware that we've seen that give us any indicators that they were running something very professional and well maintained. The first version experienced a few setbacks as the company Bitdefender released the decryptor for the earlier versions. So they were only able to release this decryptor because one of their GandCrab servers got compromised, and Bitdefender was able to get the private keys and was able to send that as an update and as a executable for decryption of specific victims that had been affected by GandCrab version 1 and 1.1. But GandCrab 2.0 was released on the same week. That's never been seen anywhere. So it almost looked like they released the malware and they were looking at vendors' response and acting accordingly very, very fast. Okay. So GandCrab has been distributed via multiple spreading vectors, mainly spam emails, but also exploit kits and other affiliated malware campaigns. So one of the very interesting things, he was not the first one to do this, but GandCrab generated one AES key per file. So it did generate the public key for encryption and the private key for decryption, but also for every file, it generated a new AES key, and it would encrypt the file, encrypt the AES key for that file, append it to the end of the file, and it would destroy the key from memory. So there was no way to recover. It was even harder than just public key encryption, right? Well, I almost forgot. That was very interesting that when you're actually doing malware research and you're creating malware, we're obviously testing that malware against different antivirus engines, right? But when you're doing this, we're actually understand the deep internals of the antivirus. And they got so mad because most security companies are really fast at deploying vaccines, that they released a proof of concept source code to trigger a vulnerability in one of the security vendors. NLab had, I think it was version 4 of GandCrab, actually had a vulnerability for a given, an exploit to exploit a vulnerability on NLab. So if you ran GandCrab version 4 on a computer that had an antivirus from NLab, it would break NLab because of that vulnerability, and it would still run. So it was the first instance that we really saw very agile and mature development practices being incorporated into malware. Next, Robinhood and targeted. Now cyber criminals are focusing on organizations that can pay and have the drive to do so. So that's mainly two things: municipalities and government institutions, right? So what they do is they don't actually work the same way as ransomware, where they breach a network and go scanning everybody and exploiting everybody, making a huge mess and a lot of noise. They actually breach the network and try to blend in with the traffic, trying to identify potential systems and understand if the network that was breached is a network from, let's say, waste management or traffic lights management for a given city, something that would make that intrusion very, very lucrative for them. So right now, these attacks have started in, if I'm not mistaken, in May. Close to 200 municipalities have been targeted so far, and that's just a few of them: Washington, Garfield County, Jackson County, Airport Augusta, city of Baltimore. So all of them were breached. There's a couple of them in Canada as well, and I think it was this week. There was a company in Spain that was breached as well, and we were able to understand that the attack was very targeted, because once they encrypted the files, the extension was the name of the company in LeetSpeak. So LeetSpeak is, yeah, okay. So a few things that actually gives us the chills more than anything else. If we, I think it was from the Ponemon Institute. Sorry, I forgot to put in the source. Half of 600 surveyed cyber professionals do not believe that their organization is prepared to repel a ransomware attack. That means they have no zero trust. They are not instrumenting their operating systems. They don't have any type of data analytics or CM solutions. So they're driving a car on a snowy road with their foggy windows, right? That's basically what's happening. And this is even more scary. Almost 80% of companies infected with ransomware were running up-to-date endpoint protection. So that says something, right? That's not enough. We're actually seeing, I have access to our threat telemetry systems within Fortinet, and we can actually see that the numbers have going down dramatically, like 90% of the volume of the ransomware is gone. But now the attacks are more devastating and they're more focused. So the shifter ransomware, they are being increasingly making the decryption more difficult. As I was explaining in GandCrab, they're not only making use of public key cryptography, but asymmetric cryptography as well per file. So it's absolutely impossible to recover this file. And this is true for all threats that we're seeing. They do not cease to innovate and shift in order to avoid detection and carry its intent without raising any alarms. So this makes detection very difficult, especially with the way that antivirus companies are doing right now. Obviously, as I've explained it before, the use of new languages makes it more difficult to catch, because even if you're using machine learning, if you're doing static and dynamic analysis, if you're feeding ransomware that was written in C, Python, and Java, and then there's a ransomware written in Go, that's it. You won't be able to catch it, even if you're running machine learning solutions on top of that. Well, we really think that the next focus would be high-profile individuals, operating technologies, and mobile, just because there's a lot of our lives are mobile right now. I have my token, all of my finances are here, so. And I do believe that if they make it ransomware with just $10 or $15, everybody would pay, because nobody would risk it. Yeah. Increasingly complex mixing behavior to trick AV engines. As I said, new languages are one of the ways that they can get through it. Distribution vectors, we've talked about this, mainly attachments in emails, but not only attachments, links as well. Social engineering, since 30 years ago, still happening, right? That happens a lot, especially when you're receiving an email from a company that you do business with. That seems to be most of the cases now. Before deploying ransomware, these guys behind it, they try to understand the company, understand which are the partners, and try to breach some of the partners, to send you an email from that partner to make it more enticing for you to open up that email. Drive-by downloads, exploit kits, and obviously there was one malware that actually was able to utilize one function of I think it was Microsoft Office, where just by hovering the mouse on top of a link was able to trigger something, trigger a payload download. So there's a ton of tricks, right? And obviously, ultimately, bugs, right? If you have a bug, that's it. There's nothing else you can do other than patch. So how does it actually work? Considering that we're exploiting a vulnerability on a browser. So let's say we receive an email with a link to your bank. In this case, it's Citibank, but it should be Citibank, but you're not actually paying attention because it's urgent, right? And then you fire up your Firefox. It's gonna go to that socially engineered site. The social engineered site would have an exploit kit on it, or just a single vulnerability. It will profile your Firefox, you're running Windows, and you have a vulnerable version of Java. Then it would exploit that vulnerability, would call PowerShell, execute only in memory, so there's no traces or no artifacts, whatsoever, which is mainly what today 70 or 80% of antivirus companies are doing. They're looking for things on disk still. They're not actually doing any memory. That's about to change because Microsoft has released advanced malware scan interface that actually makes you able to plug into the memory address space of MS-HTA, PowerShell, and other avenues of attacks for these malwares. And then boom, you are part of a botnet, right? So as I said, recent ransomware attacks are really targeted. Make sure that they deploy malware to a network that they know it is going to pay, or if not going to pay, they're going to have huge impacts. Everything needs to believe that the initial vector is not via RDP. Some researchers said it would, but most of them do not agree on that part. And once inside the network, it behaves like a ransomware, but not as hectic, right? It's trying to jump for systems to systems, looking for systems that have actual value and have actual data that the given municipality or government institution needs to carry on its business. It's different to completely shut down a company. It's a whole other issue to completely shut down a city, and they know it. So municipalities and schools are being targeted in Maryland, Georgia, New York, Tennessee, and Florida. 10,000 computers affected in Baltimore. And the ransom that they are demanding is basically 1 Bitcoin per computer or 13 Bitcoins for your whole environment. But of course, they did not negotiate with terrorists, right? So I think it took them 3 months to completely get their infrastructure on its tracks where it was, and they took 18 million in damages. Whereas if they were to pay the ransom, it would be like $100,000 or something like that. But they know, I'm gonna do it from scratch. Well, they're correct. There's no guarantee that you're gonna have the public key or that the decryption will work. So it might as well throw $100,000 on the garbage. Make sure that you have security in place before, right? Okay. So 8 million lost in revenue, 10 million recovery costs, and recovery will take months if you don't do backup, if you don't have zero trust or anything in your environment, and you actually didn't know where it started or where it has ended. So one very good thing that you guys could do to make sure that you are on the front end and you are at least clear some of the fog on your car is focusing on MITRE TTPs. A lot of people talk about indications of compromise. Well, indications of compromise mean that something is really bad in your environment and you should act accordingly. But if you're focusing on indicators of action, you may actually be able to stop that track on its tracks. But in order to do that, you must be able to be instrumenting the operating system. So if you guys don't have the actual budget to go and buy a deep behavior analytics solution or buy deception technology, which is amazing because it changes the economics of the attack. So instead of the attacker need to be right one time, it needs to be right all the time for the attack to succeed, right? So making sure that you're looking at TTPs and you're doing a proactive threat hunting in your environment, it's one of the ways to go. So recommendations, segmentation, of course, especially for ransomwares. If you have the HR department separated from the IT department, separated from the financial department, making sure that you have inspection of all of those environments, you will be able to at least understand that there's something wrong moving from one domain to another. Backup data, of course, and patching, right, of course. Recommendation, security mindset. There's a couple of a lot of companies actually that actually do phishing on demand. So be sure to accommodate that into your security mindset and setting up for controlled drills. There are threat actors trying to breach your defenses right now. Why don't you do the same, right? Try to breach, try to see what's going on, how you're processes stand up, how your technology is able to detect that. Because if you don't, most likely, if you're not breached already, you will in a short period of time. And focus on TTPs, right? Making sure that you're looking not only for indicators of compromise, which are very useful, but actual indicators of actions. Every move that an attacker must make, and MITRE ATT&CK framework actually has a bunch of them already laid out. All you have to do is get those informations into your threat intelligence platforms, making sure that you have instrumented your operating system so you can match all of those. Right? Well, recovery from an attack, imagine that nothing in your company is working. So all hands on deck, making sure that you are able to recreate all the processes, recreate all the systems. Mostly the data won't be there, but you have to make sure that everybody is on the same room, is trying to basically build the business from scratch, right? So it's important to have a list of contacts like lawyers, vendors, and system integrators to make sure that you understand what is the message that you're gonna come across and what information can be used to try to recover some of your infrastructure.